Intro, just a little bit on who I am. My name is Dwayne Kwaysee Wright, as you heard in the beginning. I am a proud graduate of an HBCU, Norfolk State University, go Spartans. Then I spent several years, about 6 or 7, up in windy, cold, Happy Valley, which in some ways were the most challenging, in some ways were the best years of my life. I got a law degree, a master's of higher education, and a PhD from Penn State, all from the same type of university, a public land grant college. And I had some of the best teachers. Some were conservative, some were, not, but they all were able to say what they needed to say to have me to engage in their arguments. I am currently an assistant professor of higher education administration here at GW. I am the director of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives for the Graduate School of Higher Education Administration. And I am honored and privileged to be able to talk to you all here today. A bit of context, I come to you today as somewhat of a reluctant critical race theorist. As you just heard, my principal training is in the law, which allows me to engage in critical race theory. As you will hear, critical race theory origins come from the law. But as a lawyer, I truly do believe in free speech. I believe in the principles that Dr. Friedman had talked about, that the way to combat speech you don't like is with more speech. And suffice it to say, I took free speech in law school well before I even engaged in critical race theory. So, if you see things that are more of an internal battle here in front of you today, know that that's just a true explanation of where I am on the issue. I think there are some principles from critical race theory that work. I think there are some principles from American free speech theory that work. I think both in their own way could be lacking, but I come here to explain to you sort of the intersection of the two here today. So I hope that's okay with you. The central question I want to engage with today is, whom does the First Amendment protect currently under our current jurisprudence, and who is left behind? Just want you to think about that for a while. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want you to think about this entire presentation and perhaps even your questions through that context. Whom does the First Amendment protect, and perhaps whom is left behind? Sorry, folks, that next slide button wasn't working too well. So we start with the text. As Justice Kagan once said, she's walked back this a little bit, we're all textualists, right? I am a lawyer, licensed lawyer. We move first to the statute or the language, and we look now at the text of the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the freedom of expression thereof, or abridging the freedom of, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. These simple words have birthed law school case books that law students hang around with almost like weights on their shoulders. It's birthed, hundreds, if not thousands, of cases in the federal and states, and it's birthed a lot of controversy. But this is sort of what we are here to discuss today. There are rules that come from the First Amendment. There are principles that come from the First Amendment, and then there are customs, right? But it all abridges to these words. I've highlighted the part that Congress shall make no law because I want to install to you that the First Amendment, as well as the first 10 amendments of the United States, applied and still do only apply directly to the federal government. The state governments excluded themselves from the first 10 amendments. And it wasn't until after the passage of a set of amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, that the First Amendment free speech clauses and the religion clauses and the free exercise clauses, et cetera, were applied to the states. That will become important as we talk about this intersection between academic freedom and critical race theory. So please do remember that. So what is free speech? Many of you were here for Jonathan Friedman's presentation, so I will breeze through this as I want to respect you and don't want to, do what I do to my students and kill you with the repetition. But It's a principle sometimes enforced by law, sometimes, that people should be free to articulate their opinions and their ideas without fear of retaliation, censorship, or legal punishment from the government. From the government. The old adage amongst our law professors is, if your child gets grounded for saying something disrespectful at the dinner table, and they say, well, I have free speech. No, you don't. You understand? Definitely not in my household, but you really don't have free speech in any private household, right? This of a particular aspect applies directly to the government. Freedom of speech is crucial to democratic self-governance. In a democracy, if we're not allowed to speak, we might as well not be allowed to actually vote. It's intricately connected to democracy. Freedom of speech is essential for the discovery of truth. Freedom of speech is an essential aspect of personhood and autonomy. I think, therefore I am, which is a little philosophical, but it's now a famous line. Or if you remember the plaquettes by those African-American men and women who used to protest in Mississippi back in the 60s and 70s that said, I am a man. Freedom of speech is the way free people in a democracy establish their personhood and their autonomy. And it is integral to the promotion of tolerance. In a society as big as ours, as diverse as ours, where people have a diverse set of views, we need freedom of speech to sort of carve out and strengthen that armor, and to have us tolerant for views that may not necessarily be intended to be hurtful, but may be hurtful, So that's what freedom of speech is. Now, some epistemological assumptions, I just want to sort of stand out the speaker's positionality here. I do believe in an ontology, a reality that says reality is constructed. I think one of the differences that you may or may not see between this presentation and the presentation that immediately follows it is, I don't believe in a rigid truth. 2 + 2 does equal 4. But it equals 4 because we says it does, right? I mean, 2 + 2 could equal something else. I mean, the entire system could be. So I'm a social constructivist. More importantly, Kathleen Sullivan, who was the former dean at the University of Stanford, wrote an article that really was about Citizens United, and when she outlined 2 different types of free speech. So Kathleen, Dean Sullivan, wrote about, free speech as equality. And this stands for, in upholding free speech rights, the Supreme Court seeks to protect members of ideological minority groups. You could think of this as affirmative action for free speech. You, the communist, who is not necessarily the majority here today, you should still be able to speak. You take whatever view you want that you might find abhorrent, whether it be the Ayatollahs in Iran that are trying to impose their views, or the few people that walk around in our academies that are Holocaust deniers. Free speech as equality says we want to encourage even minority views, even when they might be wrong, right? And the way you cast them as wrong is to encourage that. Versus a free speech as sort of liberty view. This is a little bit more of a libertarian view, right? And this says that members of the public should make up their own individual evaluations of speech, and the government is forbidden from intervening in a paternalistic or redistributive way, right? So, if in the normal sphere of the marketplace of ideas, communism dies out, well, that's the fault of communism. The government doesn't have to do anything to save it. The government doesn't have to, all the government has to do is so-called be neutral. And I want to, associate myself, for this presentation at least, with the free speech of equality perspective, and not the free speech as liberty perspective. And this too might be a difference between myself and the distinguished speaker that is going to follow me. So what is critical race theory? Unfortunately, I don't have the time today to completely describe and perform the history of critical race theory. This very workshop last year was about critical race theory. We do have some recordings on that. In fact, myself at GSHED and Dr. Arshad Ali are considering offering a graduate level course this summer on critical race theory to masters and doctoral students here at GSHED, or throughout the university. We're still considering this. So if you have a inkling for this, just let us know, send me a note and put it in the chat because we are deciding whether we're going to offer that this summer or not. However, you came here to see critical race theory and academic freedom, so I would be remiss if I didn't give you some notions of what critical race theory is. First, I don't think there is a critical race theory, right? I think there are many different aspects and many different principles that come from critical race theory. Critical race theory is not necessarily a theory like the theory of gravity. Critical race theory is a lens. It's a way of viewing things. If most of you don't know, is I wear glasses. I've worn glasses since I was 7 years old. And when I take off my glasses, when I take off my contacts, I view the world very differently. For those of us that aren't as privileged to have the ability of sight, we experience the world very differently. And I want you to think of that critical race theory is a lens. Now, glasses have different prescriptions. They have different styles. They have different point of views. And, because, as someone that studies artists that design glasses think that that's art and fashion, its own self of free expression. So therefore, there will be different descriptions of what critical race theory is. The description that follows comes from Words That Wound, Critical Race Theory, Assaultive Speech, and the First Amendment, which I thought was appropriate for this particular presentation, written by many authors, but by the godmother herself, Maria Matsudo. I have the library's copy right here in preparation for this, but I will soon be returning it. But for anyone that really wants to dive into what critical race theory is and its impact on free speech, I really do suggest this book. All right, from Words That Wound, we have a few principles. And here's the thing, folks. If you don't believe in these principles, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a racist. Now, let's be honest, you may be a bad person. No one here, right? You may be a racist. There are those that exist. I don't think that, even Adam coming up will deny that there are no racists in America or in the world. But accepting this in and of itself doesn't make you anything except just not a critical race theorist, right? So, let's, move away from the point where we keep calling people's names because of what they believe rather than what they do. I'm a critical race theorist. Most of the people that I know are progressive aren't. Most of the people that I know that are people of color aren't. I don't know why we have this scare where we think critical race theory is around the corner. But what are the principles of critical race theory? First and foremost, and I've highlighted and sort of bold this because it's probably the principal one, critical race theory recognizes that racism is endemic to American life. It's endemic to American life. What does it mean? Well, most definitions really stick home when we talk about the negative. So what does it not mean? When you are a critical race theorist, you believe that racism is systemic. Racism is not a part of a bad apple. It's not because some people wake up and make mistakes. It's because we live in a society who, through laws, some race neutral, some not, have installed a system, a sort of ether in the air that is racism. And therefore, even some issues, some principles, some practices that we see as not racist, or that quite frankly, people don't want to be racist, can be seen, if you look at it a little bit more critically, as racist. Sometimes critical race theorists are accused of seeing racism around every corner. I plead guilty. What I think is that we've been trained as a society to not see racism, even when it's right in front of us. To critical race theorists, racism is endemic. Critical race theory expresses skepticism towards the dominant legal claims of neutrality, objectivity, colorblindness, and meritocracy, right? So we're on edge when it comes to this, not just against our conservative friends, but more importantly, our liberal friends as well. Critical race theory was not a reaction to conservatism. Conservatism was there in 1980 when those of Derek Bell, Mashida Matsudo, Kimberly Crenshaw began investigating this, Luke Harris and others. It was a reaction to the shortfalls of liberal, or so-called what we call today progressive ideology. Critical race theory challenges ahistoricism and insists on a contextual/historical analysis of the law. So you might say, Dr. Wright, I thought it was the libertarians. I thought it was conservatives, however you want to define that nowadays, that believed in originalism. Well, I thought so too. I can't really speak for anyone else but myself and my views, but I know that critical race theory speaks to the history of slavery since 1619, the history since 1776, slavery all the way up to the Civil War and discrimination beyond it. CRT insists on the recognition of experimental knowledge of people of color and our communities of origin. CRT is interdisciplinary, so we do not form or function in any one, and I represent that in you in the body. I am a lawyer that sits in the College of Education and love what I do because I believe education is the first right. And CRT works towards the elimination of racial oppression as part of the broader goal of eliminating all other forms of oppression. This has become colloquially known as intersectionality. And I don't really have to explain that, hopefully, but if you have any questions about that and how that relates, please put it in the chat. Okay, so what does critical race theory say about free speech? So, using some of the tenets expressed by Matsudo et al. In the words that wound, here is how critical race theory would sort of view free speech. Because critical race theory recognizes that racism is endemic in life, therefore, we say any move by the government to be called so-called neutral will typically result in the proliferation of racism. Without, to use a fraught term, affirmative steps or affirmative actions to correct the racism that was installed. Folks, just think about it. We had slaves in this country since 1619, all the way up until the end of the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, we had nearly 100 years of Jim Crow. That time, in which, if you count 1619 as the beginning till now, actually outlasts the 200 years of America. America has not turned 200 years yet, but the oppression, particularly on racial lines, is actually older than America. Therefore, what critical race theory says, particularly when it comes to free speech, is if you're going to be neutral, that itself is an implicit, if not explicit, sort of choice to propagate racism, because racism is endemic. Don't have to accept it, but that's the theory. CRT expresses skepticism toward dominant legal claims, particularly neutrality. Therefore, CRT questions if the best way to combat hateful speech is by requiring those victimized by it to speak up more. And, this might be a disagreement between both the previous presentation and the next presentation. We hear the old adage, the way to combat speech is by more speech. When I talk to students and they're here at GW, they're here in our HBCUs, our HSIs, and everywhere across America, and they say, you know what, Dr. Wright, it was so hard for me just to get into this seat. There's so many things that I didn't do. I had to dodge bullets. I had to, while my parents and family were out on the farm, I was reading. And to have to actually continuously fight after I do all that just to earn my own basic dignity is too much. And we see students drop out because of the psychological violence. My colleague Denise Dortch talks about this a lot, that's experienced there. So CRT will say, okay, you're going to be so-called neutral and then ask the same victims to defend themselves. That's a little bit of victim blaming. The CRT challenges the ahistoricism and insists on contextual/historical analysis of the law. Therefore, CRT asks, why should we permit the proliferation of racist speech, hate speech, I'm going to call it in a second, assaultive speech, when the 14th Amendment was passed to ensure racial equity? As I said before, the First Amendment of the United States does not apply directly to the states. It only applies as incorporated through this 14th Amendment, which was passed to install racial equality. So therefore, if that is the true history, and anyone, chat, otherwise feel free to contest it, why then do we say that same First Amendment as incorporated through the 14th should allow hate speech? Not sure, someone was going to tell me, I'm sure, in the chat. And CRT is interdisciplinary. Therefore, it insists that other methods of inquiry besides the law, and I say that as a lawyer, must come to bear to describe what hate speech is. Dr. Freeman was 100% right in our previous presentation. There is nothing legally as hate speech. Well, what about the psychologists? What about the philosophers? What about the sociologists? What do they have to say on the terms? All right, I'll pause for just 1 second to let that sink in, as I do anticipate your questions in the chat and at the end. CRT does not refer to hate speech as hate speech. CRT refers to hate speech as assaultive speech. And the reason that we refer to hate speech, or what's known as hate speech, as assaultive speech is because we want to emphasize that this is words that are intended to cause harm. They may not cause physical harm, but when you're in a classroom, and now I'm talking specifically to my fellow professors, as we're here to talk about academic freedom today, certain words in certain contexts, when you attack epistemically someone's worth as a learner, might as well be a punch in the face. I know that might be controversial to say. I know where you're going to go with it. Well, Dr. Wright, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What about the student that says, well, while the N-word might be assaultive speech to that young Black woman over there, who's the only one in our class, Black Lives Matter is assaultive speech to me? That's a good question. And we're going to get into that throughout the day. However, I just want to, as far as nomenclature, I will no longer be calling it hate speech unless it's a quote. I'll probably be calling it assaultive speech. So now we can breeze through this. What is academic freedom? You should be experts on this now, if anyone that attended the first session. But academic freedom is a special type of freedom of speech. It's enforced more by the courts and by contracts and custom than the courts. There is no place in the federal constitution, at least, that says academic freedom. We've interpreted. Some states' constitutions might have it, most don't. At private schools here like GW, even if there was something in the federal constitution, it wouldn't apply. There is no federal law that says academic freedom must apply. There's no Title VI component, which binds racial discrimination, even if you're a private school. There's no Title IX component, which installs gender and recently gender identity and sexual orientation protections. So academic freedom is accepted by custom. So you might say, well, Dr. Wright, can GW not offer academic freedom to its professors? It can. If I could be as bold to say, that probably would be the end of GW, because no one who's a serious academic would want to work there. And I think that is the thing that I'm wrestling with my students, is that, you can have restrictions on academic freedom at a private school, but what are the consequences of that? And I won't read the rest of this to you because I think Dr. Friedman did a great job of installing academic freedom for you, but this is sort of what academic freedom is. I do want to make sure we understand the distinction between individual academic freedom, which protects the individual professor and governs their relationships with stakeholders, and institutional academic freedom, right? That the university of itself has academic freedom as well as the professors therein. The university doesn't give the individual academic freedom. These are two separate concepts, but they both have it independently. Universities are First Amendment institutions. This is a concept that's really a conservative concept. Paul Horowitz is the citation here. It's called Goethe's First Amendment for any law students on here, anyone else that wants to read the case. And this comes from a case that is not as well known. This case happened 3 years after Brown versus Board of Ed, and the case is called Sweezy versus New Hampshire. Sweezy versus New Hampshire. I won't go through all the facts of it. A quick Google search could get you there and what it has to do. But from Sweezy versus New Hampshire, we get these 4 essential freedoms, folks, 4 essential freedoms that constitute what we know today as academic freedom. No, the court did not say in this that this is academic freedom. In fact, the 4 essential freedoms come from a concurrence, not a majority in a court opinion. Don't worry about what that means because it's not necessarily important to understand. But here are the 4 essential freedoms. The court, speaking in a concurrence, said a university has a First Amendment right to determine for itself on academic grounds, 1, who may teach, so think tenure, what may be taught, so think curriculum, how it shall be taught, think method, and who may be admitted, think admissions. These are the 4 essential freedoms, folks, from Sweezy versus New Hampshire that constitute what we think of today as academic freedom. And what I want to sort of impose to you today is, if not all, some of these freedoms are under attack today from people that say they promote academic freedom. And, how do we reconcile that sort of ontological, epistemological, intellectual schizophrenia as we move on to talk about it? A few examples. Moves by, I won't say conservative and liberal legislators to ban tenure at schools. And in fact, if you talk to folks at Georgia, talk to folks in Florida, tenure is all but a memory in name only. Moves by certain people to ban subjects, whole subjects, as critical race theory from schools, not just in K through 12, but in higher ed as well. And most recently, what can only be described as an audacious power grab by a state to say that public university curricula are government speech. And make no mistake, folks, what Florida is trying to profligate here today is to say, we get to decide what happens in Chemistry 101. We get to decide what is taught in Political Science 201. We get to decide, even in your medical school curricula, who gets to actually teach what. Think about how dangerous that would be, no matter what your political persuasion, what your identity, if what is truth is left up not to the free and flow of debate, but left up to the state. And I think all presenters, hopefully today, would sort of share a pause, if not an objection, to such a view. So I just want to recenter us back to the central claim. And we're talking about who does the First Amendment protect, and in its protections, under current jurisprudence, who might it leave behind? So I'm going to engage folks in now an exercise very quickly when critical race counter storytelling. And Saranzo and Yuso talk about counter storytelling as a method of telling stories of those people whose experiences are not often told, including people of color, women, gay people, the poor, going to the intersectionality that's at the heart of critical race theory. Counter stories or counter narratives stand in opposition to narratives of dominance, which we term as majoritarian stories. So let's think together. I want you, if you can, if it's possible, if you're so inclined, to maybe just close your eyes and let's imagine. I want to imagine because I don't want to offend any state, and I want to take it out of the suspension of what is actually happening. And these are all just hypotheticals. So I'm thinking of a hypothetical state. I don't want to call the state California. I don't want to call the state Michigan because I don't want to be accused of beating up on any state, or Alabama. Let's call this the state of denial. Why denial? Denial in Egypt, denial, just call it the state of denial. In this state of denial, the state legislature has passed a critical race theory ban, one that impacts K through 12 schools as well as post-secondary education, as in Idaho and Iowa. They've also passed, perhaps before, an affirmative action ban, as the ones that we see now in California and Michigan. And in this state of denial, we have two characters. We have Rebecca, a Black female tenured track law professor at a public school in the state of denial. And Dwayne, I wanted to use a amalgamation of my name as to not offend anyone, a white male 2L studying in Rebecca's course, and Rebecca's course is on constitutional law. This particular session is on the use of assaultive, or what some people would say is hate speech. And I want you to think as we walk through this, who is the First Amendment protecting and who is it leaving behind? We often have this analogy in the law of the law providing a sword and a shield. Perhaps a sword to one type of group and a shield to the other, to allow them on neutral grounds to have a combat out. So that if that is the case, we see it in the First Amendment, we hear it in the Fourth Amendment, we hear it in grand juries. I want to think about who has the sword in this instance and who has the shield. So Dwayne insists on using the N-word. I'll say the N-word here, but you understand the larger context of the word, hopefully in class, during a week-long, that should say lesson, I apologize, on free speech, right? So Dwayne is like, I want to say the word. Why? Because as Nolan Cabrera, a colleague out of the University of Arizona, says that a lot of white males said in his study, and I'll try to put the study up at the end of the presentation, if Lil Wayne could say it, why can't I? Right? I should have the same rights as Lil Wayne. I'm a big Lil Wayne fan, even as a 2L in law school. That's fine. I was a big Lil Wayne fan myself. I should be able to say it. You can't do anything about it, professor. Why? And this is a public school. So Rebecca can't, remove him from the classroom, or at least it would cause some controversy. It's something that if it happened here, the Hatchet would write about. Dwayne has the sword. So the question is, where is Rebecca's shield? Where is the First Amendment, arming one person with a shield, arming another person with a sword to actually give them a fair and fighting chance in this marketplace of ideas? Well, recall that this state of denial has a critical race theory ban, which would prevent Rebecca from using any principles, concepts of critical race theory in the classroom. Or at least we think, we don't know. These are poster childs for what I call vagueness and overbreath, but that's another point for another time. It does this even though the 4 essential freedoms that constitute academic freedom are explicitly what may be thought and the method to teach it. So if you're just looking at the 4 essential freedoms, it's clear that critical race theory bans are a violation, if not the First Amendment, definitely the principle of academic freedom. However, the state of denial decides to put it there anyway. So what if critical race theory wasn't banned in the state of denial? What would Rebecca be able to engage Dwayne on with? Well, Rebecca might be able to explain to Dwayne why the N-word is a violent word when used in certain contexts because of a certain history. She may be able to say that somewhere I read about the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people since 1619. In fact, the size of the population of the states of maybe Rhode Island and Wyoming that were lynched, maimed because of this word. And because of that history, in certain contexts, if one person uses it, one thing happens, and if another person uses it, something else happens. If CRT wasn't banned. If CRT wasn't banned, Rebecca might be able to explain to Dwayne to attack the ahistoricism of some of our free speech jurisprudence that the First Amendment does not apply directly to the states. The University of Maryland, the University of George Mason University has the First Amendment because it's been incorporated through the 14th Amendment, an amendment explicitly, without doubt, if you're an originalist, no matter what you are, passed in order to install equality to the freedmen, to the former slaves. I was nearly brought to tears when our newest justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, gave her first lecture on this last week at the voting rights case about the history of the 14th Amendment. But Rebecca cannot say any of this because it's now being branded as critical race theory, just honest truth about our constitutional history. Rebecca might be able to offer the argument that hate speech spoken in the classroom is as assaultive as a punch in the face. And as Dwayne could not learn if people are punching him in the face, how do you expect other classmates to learn? How do you expect me, Rebecca, to constitute the class with a punch in the face? And folks, this often happens in the argument about free speech. I think people adopt the type of formalism that just doesn't make sense to me. That, if I were, given a job talk and people just kept hitting me in the head and I had to actually give the job talk and get the job with someone just hitting me in the head with a pen, I'm actually going through leaps and bounds to get the same job as someone who's not being hit in the head. Yet when we say that speech like this is the equivalent of hitting someone in the head, we expect people, a tenure track professor, probably the only black professor in the school like Rebecca, to do that, you understand, and do it in heels as well. Can't say any of that because critical race theory is banned. Once again, folks, who has the sword and who has the shield? It's clear that the sword is being put in Dwayne's hand, but bans on critical race theory are removing the shield from Rebecca's hand. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Dr. Wright, that's fine. Rebecca's grown. She's a law professor. She's getting paid a lot of money. It should be the other people in the class that are actually speaking up. The other students in the class. And then the professor is just up there, as Chief Justice Roberts once said, calling balls and strikes. This is an aversion of the so-called marketplace of ideas. It says that truth emerges from a so-called competition of ideas in a free and open and transparent public discourse, and that ideologies will be rejected or accepted according to their, I put another word in there, natural superiority or inferiority and widespread acceptance amongst the population. It's a very neoliberal, if I might say myself, way of thinking about it, but let's go with it for just a couple of minutes, as I know my time is coming to an end. Remember that the state of denial doesn't just have a critical race theory ban, but it also has a ban on affirmative action. So if you want to go with the marketplace of ideas analogy, and you want to say, well, the sword is given to Dwayne, but the shield is given, and perhaps another sword, to the other people in the classroom, why ban affirmative action? In fact, going back to the 4 essential freedoms of academic freedom, the last one there, often unexplored, is the university has for a right to determine for itself on academic grounds who may be admitted. In fact, the established case until maybe June on affirmative action is the lone decision by Lewis Powell versus Bakke. And he cited directly the Kwaysee versus New Hampshire case, and by adoption, the 4 essential freedoms of academic freedom, when he gave us the diversity rationale for affirmative action. So, you often hear about neutrality. Government actors, including government employees, the university professor up there, should be 100% neutral, right? We shouldn't take an ideology, we shouldn't take an idea, we just need to be neutral. But is colorblindness and banning affirmative action really being neutral? And here I want to associate my comments with 2 critical race theorists, Devin Cabano and Cheryl Harris, which wrote a paper called The New Racial Preferences, where we talked a little bit about viewpoint neutrality early in the first presentation. A ban on CRT, a ban on affirmative action is not viewpoint neutral. Just because the actual counter view advances whiteness does not necessarily mean that's a neutral view. That is as much a viewpoint as anything else. So the government staying neutral in here is really and truly taking its own preference for colorblindness, right? And of course, the same Congress, which passed the 14th Amendment, which again is the only reason for First Amendments applied to the states, passed affirmative action laws the next year. So even if you take an originalist perspective, I don't see how you could say that the Constitution calls for colorblindness, right? But I am the only one. What if there's only one student in the class? How does the marketplace of ideas work that way when you're banning affirmative action? This is not to say that only minoritized people can actually profit a certain point of view, but it is to say, because of the history, goes back to the history, CRT is all about history of this nation and what we actually do, that certain views are embedded in certain individuals. If you want a marketplace of ideas, maybe you should not restrict the marketplace. I don't know, just an idea, just an idea. All right, so to wrap up before we go to questions, who does the First Amendment protect? Who does it offer a both sword and a shield? Is it this hypothetical, ideological, ideal white knight who's given both a sword and a shield? The ability to say, I don't want to use your specified pronouns because of academic freedom, because of the First Amendment, but I also don't think my colleagues can teach critical race theory. Taking away academic freedom for some while giving it to the other. Free speech for me, censorship for thee. Who does the current First Amendment protect, and who does it leave without the sword, without the shield to fend for itself? And perhaps a more difficult question, who should academic freedom protect? If it's going to protect everyone and there are uneven consequences, neutrality, folks, towards the status quo, it only advances the status quo because the status quo is there for a reason. Should academic freedom protect professors? I think it should. The same academic freedom that Jonathan talked about, that Adam will talk about, protects me as a critical race theorist in the classroom. But what about our students? What environment are they entitled to learn as well? So I'll leave you with those 2 questions. Who does the First Amendment protect? Who's given the sword and the shield? And whom should academic freedom protect? And I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions, and I'll stop sharing the screen now. Thank you.